Rabbi said we have a lot of ground to cover. Let's just finish off our Agadata on the Churban. Nun Ches Amud Aleph says, B'nei Tzion, we're at the two dots. B'nei Tzion ha'yikarim ha'misulaim b'paz. This is a pasuk in Eicha. Children of Zion, how precious, covered with fine gold. So the question is, Ma misulaim b'paz? What does it mean they're covered with fine gold? So, if you're going to take that literally, that they were adorned with fine jewelry, made out of fine gold, the Ha'amri Devei Rabbi Shila Tarte Mitzkali Isteri Pisa Nechos Ba'alma Chada Barome V'Chada B'Kuli Alma. That doesn't make sense, because you wouldn't praise the Jewish people as saying they had a lot of gold, because we have a tradition that 2 measures of gold fell to the world. One landed in Rome and the other one was scattered throughout the rest of the world. So if we wanted to talk about possessors of gold, it would be Rome, it wouldn't be the Jewish people. So Ela Shahayu Meganenis Hapaz Biyofyan. But rather what it means is, metaphorically, that the Jewish people's beauty at this time was so amazing that they would embarrass fine gold with their beauty. In other words, they put other beautiful things to shame. So meikara chashivi de romoi havunakti bilyona de kushbanka umeshamshi arsaihu. And the Gemara illustrates, the idea that is found even in the Torah, that when animals are in heat and they are copulating, if they're thinking or looking at something at the time of conception, then the offspring will resemble what they're thinking about, right? So, that's right, from Yaakov. So this was a universal idea in the ancient world as well. And so therefore, when the Romans would want to have beautiful children, they would look at images that they would engrave on different things in their bedrooms to be able to have beautiful children. Mikan va'ilach maisu b'nei Yisrael va'asri bekari depurayu u'mishamshi. But what they did was, when they took Jewish slaves, they said, wow, the Jewish slaves are beautiful. They tied the Jews to their bedposts so that while they were engaged in intimacy, they could look at the Jewish slaves. Now, of course, there's probably nothing more degrading than that, to have to be tied to a bedpost while this is going on. So therefore, Amar lechad lechavre. So one Jewish slave said to his friend one day, he says, Ha hecha ksiva. Where is such a curse against the Jewish people written in the Torah? Amar lei, gam kol choli v'chol maka asher lo chasuf b'sefer haTorah hazos. He says, well, it's written in the Tochacha. It says at the end of the Tochacha, even every sickness and every affliction that is not written in the Torah, God will bring upon you. So therefore, that covers a huge gamut of things, right? Even things that are not written. So, and then the exchange is very bizarre. Amar kama marchikna miduchta plan. So the other guy said to him, gee, I didn't know that pasuk. How far am I from getting to that pasuk in my studies? So Amar lei ingad pusta upalga. He says just a short amount, a page and a half. So Amar lei, so he said back to him, imatoy legabe lo itzrichalach. Oh, if only I had come to that point in my studies, I wouldn't have needed to ask you this question, or I wouldn't have needed you. So, what is the point of this last part of the exchange? You could learn it a number of different ways. My understanding is, as we'll see, towards the end of the Second Temple period, there was a great amount of strife among Jews, and really general disregard and disrespect. So the point is that even while they're trying to console each other, they're still taking jabs at each other. That's perhaps one way of understanding it. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Mai Dichsiv Eini Olala Lenafshi Mikol Benos Iri. So he asked the question, what does the pasuk in Eicha mean when it says that my eye is suffering causing suffering to my soul because of all the daughters of my city? This means that arba meos bate kinesios hayu bikrach beitar uvechol echas ve'echas hayu ba arba meos malamdei tinokos v'chol echad ve'echad hayu lefanav arba meos tinokos shel beis rabban. This tells me there were 400 synagogues in the city of Beitar. And in each and every synagogue, there were 400 teachers. and each teacher had 400 disciples. Now this is again Lashon Guzma. There's some significance al pi Kabbalah to the number 400 to the description of this, but someone mentioned to me this morning that today in Beitar there are probably 400 shuls and 400 teachers in every shul. Whether or not each one has 400 students is not clear, but the point is that Baruch Hashem today you see in Eretz Yisrael this tremendous growth of Torah. And anytime an enemy would walk into one of these synagogues, a teacher could easily stab him with his staff, with his stick. I don't think it means literally they would stab him. It means that they were great scholars and they could fend off any intellectual attacks. But the point is that we lost so much. Look at how much we lost. When the enemy came in, they wrapped all of these teachers with Sifrei Torah and their students and burned them all with fire. Terrible, terrible tragedy. Tana Rabbanan Maisa b'Rebbe Yehoshua ben Chananya shahalach likrach gadol shebaromi. Amr lo tinok echad yesh beveso asurim yefei einayim v'tov ro'i ukavutzosav suduros lo taltalim. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya goes to a large town in Rome, and they tell him that there's a child here from the Jews that has been imprisoned in the jail in this town. He's a beautiful child, beautiful eyes, beautiful hair with curls that go down. So halach v'omar al Pesach beis ha'asurim omar minasan l'mishisa Yaakov v'Yisrael avozazim. And he goes to the entrance of the prison and cries out the beginning of the pasuk in Yeshaya, that who has placed Jacob as the Meshisa to be trampled upon and Yisrael to be despoiled. So ana osotinok va'omar halo Hashem zu chatanu lo v'lo avu bidrachav haloch v'lo shamu b'toraso. So the child responds with saying the latter part of the pasuk. It is, behold Hashem, because we have sinned against him, and the Jewish people did not go in his ways and did not listen to his teaching. So Omar Muvtachni bo Shemora Harabi Yisrael Ha'avoda Sheni Zoz Mikanat She'evdenu B'chol Mobam Sheposkim Olav. So Rabbi Yehoshua, when he hears this child be able to quote the pasuk so instantaneously, says this child will become someone great eventually in Israel. He'll be a great posek, and therefore I swear that I will redeem him from captivity no matter what they ask of me. Amru lo zaz mishamad shepedo b'mamon harbe v'lo hayu yomim mu'atim ad shahora Rabbi Yisrael umanu Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. And the story continues that he did not move until he succeeded in redeeming him, and it didn't take long before this little boy became a great posek, and he was none other than Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, who eventually also became, according to tradition, a Kohen Gadol during the end of the Second Temple period. Amar of Yehuda Amar Rav Maisa bivno vivito shel Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha shenishbu l'shnei adonim. And there's a story that the son and the daughter of Rabbi Yishmael were beautiful children, and they were taken captives as well, and they were taken as slaves to two different masters. We read about this story in the Kinos on Tisha B'Av. Liyamim nizdavgu shneim b'makom echad, ze omer yesh li eved she'en kiyofya b'chol ha'olam, v'ze omer yesh li shivcha she'en b'chol ha'olam kulo kiyofya. These two slave owners eventually met one day in the pub or wherever, and each one was bragging about the beauty of their respective slaves. So Amru Bo v'Nasim zelazeh u'nechalek bevlados. They had a great idea. Let's mate the two slaves. They're both so beautiful. They'll have beautiful children, and we'll divide the slave children. So Ichnisim l'cheder ze yoshav b'keren zavis v'ze yoshva b'keren zavis ze oimer ani kohen ben kohanim gedolim es shivcha v'zo someres ani kohenes bas kohanim gedolim inase le'eved. Each one they're brought into a room, and they basically say, okay, have at it. And each one goes into their respective corners and starts crying. And the boy says, I'm the son of Kohanim Gedolim, and I should have to mate with a Shivcha. And the girl says, I'm the daughter of Kohanim Gedolim, I should have to consort with an Eved. Ubachu kol halayla, and they cried all night. Kevin sha'ala amud hashachar hikiru ze'ezeh, v'naflu ze al zeh, v'go b'bechia ad sheyatzu nishmasan. When the morning light comes and they see that it's brother and sister, they fall upon each other in just terrible pathos, and they cry out, and they're so distraught that they both pass away. They both die. Me'alein konen Yirmiyah alela nivochia eini yordamayim. And about them Yirmiyah elegizes, he says, on these do I cry, my eye flows with water. Amar Reish Lakish Maisa Beisha Echas B'Tzofnas Bas Peniel Shema Tzofnas She'akol Tzofin B'Yofia Bas Peniel Bito Shel Kohen Gadol Sheshimesh Lifnai V'Lifnim. There was once a story about a beautiful young lady. Her name was Tzofnas Bas Peniel. The reason she was called Tzofnas from the word Litzapot, which is to gaze upon. Everyone gazed at her beauty. Her father's name Peniel because he was a Kohen Gadol. So this is a pseudonym. We don't even want to reveal her identity. Peniel because he used to go into the Holy of Holies, into the Panim, to meet God, right? Shenisalol ba shavoy kol halayla. She's taken as a captive, as a slave, and her captor has his way with her the entire night. L'macher hilbisha shiva chalukim v'hotzi l'mocher. The next day he places 7 garments upon her and takes her to the slave market to sell her. Ba adam echad shayimachur biyoser. Omer lo hareini es yofia. And an especially disgusting man comes along and says, I want to see her beauty, show me some flesh. So Amar lo reika imatarotza likach kach she'in kiyofia b'chol ha'olam kulo. So the owner says to him, "O empty one, you want to buy her, you buy her. There's no greater beauty than this in the world." Amar lo afal pichein. He says, nonetheless, I demand to see. So hivshita shisha chalukim ushvia kar aso v'nispalsha be'efer. So the master agreed to remove 6 of her garments, and by the 7th garment, the guy was so disgusting and coarse that he ripped off the 7th garment, and she had to roll in the dust in order to cover herself. Amr lefan of Ribono shel Olam imaleinu lo chasta al kedusha shimcha gibor lama lo tachus. So she said, Ribono shel Olam, you don't care about us, but why aren't you worried about your divine name that is being so disgraced with the downfall of the Jewish people? Ve'aleha konen Yirmiyah, and about her statement, Yirmiyah elegizes by saying as follows. He says, Bas ami chigrisak v'ispalshi be'efer, Evel yachid asilach mispei tamrurim, ki pisom yavo hashodet aleinu, period. He says, daughter of my people, don sackcloth and roll in the dirt, make individual mourning for yourself and terrible eulogies, because immediately or suddenly the enemy will come upon you, and it says not upon you but upon us. Alayich lo nemar ela aleinu kivyachol alay v'alayich bashodet. And therefore it's almost like Hashem is saying kavyachol, that the enemy comes against both of us. Whenever the Jews are disgraced, Hashem is disgraced as well. Amar of Yehuda Amar Rav Mai dichse ve'ashku gever ubeso ve'ish v'nachalaso. And this is the last story that we'll see for today. What does it mean that the prophet Micha says that the Jewish... We're now switching gears in our stories. Up until now we were talking about how the Romans oppressed the Jews. Now we go back to a discussion about the vile behavior of some of the Jews who lived in that last generation before the Churban. It says in the Pasuk that they will oppress a man in his house, a man in his inheritance. And this refers to Maisa ba'adam echad shenasan einav be'eshes rabo v'shulya denagri hava. There was once a man who fell in love with a married woman, and he happened to be the apprentice of the man who was married to her. The mentor was a blacksmith, and he was a blacksmith's apprentice. So Pam echas hutzrach rabo lilvos amar lo shgar ishtecha etzli ve'elvena. One day the mentor was short of cash, so the apprentice said to him, he must have been like a little spoiled kid from a wealthy family. He said, you know what, no problem, send her to me, to my house, I'll give her the money, and then I'll send her right back to you. So Shogar Ishto Etzlo, Shaha Ima Shlosha Yamim, Kadamu Ba Etzlo, Amarlo Ishti Shishigarti Lach Eichani. So he sends, the mentor sends the wife to the apprentice. The apprentice keeps her in his house for 3 days. The Gemara doesn't explain what was going on during those 3 days, but you'll see that this was a pretense, right? The mentor finally comes to the apprentice's house. He says, "What happened to my wife? I sent her to you 3 days ago. She's nowhere to be found." So Amar lo ani patartia la'alter v'shamati shatinokos nis'alalu baderech. So the apprentice says, he lies through his teeth, and he says, "Well, I gave her the money right away. She left, but I heard that she was attacked along the way by some boys, and maybe that's probably what happened to her. Is that that's the problem?" So Amar lo ma So the guy says, well, what do you think I should do? And there's eventually his wife will come home. What should I do when she comes home? So Amar Lo, Imato Shomei Alad Sasi Gerusha. He says, well, if you want to listen to my, you know what I would do in that situation? I just divorce her if she's been attacked and she's sort of allowed herself to be, to be the object of this kind of behavior. So Amar Lo Ksuvasa Meruba. So he said, fine, I'm willing to divorce her, but I can't afford to divorce her. She's got a big ksuva. Amar Lo ani alvecha v'tein lo ksuvasa. The apprentice says, no problem, I'll lend you the money, you can pay off her ksuva, and everything will be fine. So Amad Zeh v'gir shahalachu v'nasa. So the mentor divorces his wife eventually when she comes home. The apprentice then goes ahead and marries her. So the time came for the loan to be paid back that the apprentice had given to the mentor. And so the mentor still has no cash, so the apprentice says, no problem, come and work for me, you'll work off the debt. So so the most painful kind of experience that a person can imagine. Here the guy's been swindled out of money, he's been swindled out of his wife, and you've got the apprentice, the former apprentice, sitting, eating and drinking together with his new wife, who's the ex-wife of the guy that's now serving him, and his tears, the mentor's tears, are falling into the cups of wine of his apprentice and his ex-wife. And that's eventually why, that's when the die was cast against the Jewish people. If a member of the Jewish community can behave in such a dastardly way, they're not worthy of having a temple anymore. And some say, and this is the last line of the Gemara, some say that the die was cast for the Churban because there was adultery that was going on. This is a euphemism. The Gemara says 2 wicks and 1 candle, that's a euphemism for adultery. Let's go on. We now switch gears completely, and we're going back to our halachic discussion of the Mishnah. Remember, we're all talking about tikkun olam. We're talking about remedies and enactments that the rabbis made in order to preserve societal norms. And the Mishnah had talked about this idea of a sikri kon. What is a sikri kon? A sikri kon is a Gentile oppressor who confiscates property under penalty of death, which basically means he says, I've decided I want your property, eminent domain, and you give it to me, and if you contest it and you protest, I'm going to kill you. So the Mishnah had originally said that in order for a Jew to be able to purchase that property from the sikri kon, he has to first go to the Jew, who was the original owner, make a deal with him, and then, and only then, can he buy it from the sikri kon. If he goes to the sikri kon first and makes a deal and buys it from the sikri kon, and then tries to make a financial deal with the Jewish owner, the original Jewish owner, that's not going to work, because we're worried that the Jew is going to still fear for his life, because the buyer has gone first to the sikri kon. So you can't do it. You have to do it in the order of first go to the Jew, make sure that the Jew is on the completely without the sikri kon in the deal. First appease him and buy him off, and then you can buy it from the sikri kon. Later, the rabbis made a later takana, and they said that any time a sikri kon confiscates property, the assumption is that the original owner has been miyayish, has given up hope of ever retrieving it, and therefore we allow a Jew to buy it from a sikri kon, but he has to pay 25% of the purchase price to the original owner, with 2 provisos. Number 1, the sikri kon has to have had it in his possession for 12 months, and number 2, that we give the original owner first rights of refusal to buy it back from the sikri kon. If he refuses, and the sikri kon has had it for 12 months, then any other Jew can buy it from the sikri kon, but he has to pay a 25% tacked on fee to the original owner. And the reason why it's 25%, by the way, is because there's an assumption that because the sikri kon got it for free, he's going to sell it at a discount anyway. And so therefore the Jew is getting a bargain at the other Jew's expense. So the bargain that he's getting is probably going to get it only for 75% of its value. If the land is worth 100, he's only going to have to pay 75 anyway, so let him pay the other 25 at least to the original owner. So now the Gemara says, Amar Rav, lo shanu ela de Amar lo leich chazeku kini, avol bishtar kana. So Rav says, our Mishnah had said that if you make a deal first with the Sikri Kohen to buy it, and then you go over to the Jew can later nullify the sale in Bayston if the Sikri Kohen is out of the picture. But Rav says that's only true if the Jew, when you go over to him after you went over to the Sikri Kohen, only verbally agrees to sell it to you by telling you in front of two witnesses, go ahead and make a kinyan, you have my blessing. But if he actually writes a shtar and has the shtar drawn up in front of two witnesses, so then he cannot protest afterwards and sue, even if you went first to the Sikri Kohen and then to the Jew. And Shmuel disagrees. Shmuel says that it's not just enough to write a shtar. The original owner has to not only agree to write a shtar, but also has to designate collateral property should the sale ever be reversed. In other words, the original owner has to say, not only will I let you write up a shtar that you are now the new owner, but also I hereby designate that if for any reason I end up getting back that property from you, you can take another designated property from me for your purchase price. And only there does Shmuel say that it's a valid sale, even though you went first to the Sikri Kohen and then to the Jew. Tanya Kavase di Shmuel, we have a brisa that supports Shmuel. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Lokach min ha'isha v'chazer v'lokach min ha'ish mekcho kayim. Min ha'ish v'chazer v'lokach min ha'isha mekach batel, ashetichtov lo achrayas. So a case of ksuva, which was also enumerated by the Mishnah, is very similar because a ksuva is a promissory note that's very valuable. So if, let's say, a woman sells her ksuva, that's a financial instrument that can fetch a very good price. If, however, a buyer first goes to the husband and says, I'd like to buy your wife's ksuva, and the husband consents, and then he goes to the wife, we're scared that the wife is intimidated by her husband's consent, and therefore she's not really consenting with the full heart, and she can therefore later invalidate the sale. But if he goes first to the wife and she consents and then gets the husband's blessing, then it's a valid sale. But if he goes to the husband first and then to the wife, and then the wife says, okay, I'll sell you the ksuva and let's write a shtar and I'll designate that you, if for whatever reason you end up losing my ksuva and I have to give it back to me, I'll designate property in the shtar, so only then and only then is it a valid sale, even though you went to the husband first. So that shows that Shmuel is correct. You need not only a shtar, but you also need to put achrayas in the shtar, to enumerate collateral in the shtar. So Neima tihavi tiyuvta de Rav. So let's say this is a challenge to Rav, who says that a shtar is sufficient. You don't have to write achrayas in the shtar. So the Gemara says, no. Amar lecha Rav, my achrayas, no mishtar. Rav will tell you that the word achrayas just means some kind of guarantee. The shtar itself is a guarantee. You don't have to enumerate collateral real estate in the shtar. Just writing the shtar is itself the guarantee. And therefore it's not a contradiction to what I was suggesting, that a shtar is sufficient. Tanu Rabbanan, lokach min hasikri kon ve'achla shalosh shanim b'fnei ba'alim v'chazar u'machar la'acher ein leba'alim alokech sheni klum. Now let's look at another brisa. The brisa says that if you got a guy named Reuven, and he buys a piece of property from a Sikri Kohen who had confiscated it originally from a Jew whose name is Shimon. Okay? That's the case. Reuven lives on the property for 3 years. For 3 years, in Shimon's presence. In other words, Shimon lives in the neighborhood. He knows that Reuven is living on his property. He's living there for 3 years. Reuven then, after 3 years, decides he's going to sell the property to Levi. So the halacha is, if Levi purchases it, Shimon has no rights to go and sue Levi in Bayston. He has no rights to sue Levi in Bayston. So the Gemara now says, Heichi dami, idekatoin v'amar minach zavna afilu rishon nami. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. If the case is that Reuven, who bought it from the Sikri Kohen, claims that he already paid off Shimon, the 25% that he owes him, like we said, that was the later enactment. I paid you the 25%. So then why does the brisa only say that Shimon has no claim only when Reuven sells it to Levi? The brisa should say that Shimon has no claim against Reuven either. Reuven's been living on the property for 3 years. He claims that he paid off Shimon according to the takana. So what kind of claim can Shimon have against not only Levi, but he can't have the claim against the buyer himself, Reuven, the original buyer. So idalo katoin v'amar minach zavna filu sheini nami lo. And if Reuven is not making that claim that he properly paid off the 25% to Shimon, the original owner, so then it shouldn't make a difference whether Reuven is the owner or whether he sold it to Levi. In both cases, Shimon can bring a lawsuit in Bayston. So Amar of Sheshus la'olam delo katoin le uchagon zeh tonin liyorish v'tonin lokeach v'idach itoin in v'ilo toin lo. So he says the way you have to. Rav Sheshus says the way you understand the brisa is as follows: Reuven lived on the property for 3 years, but he never made the claim during that entire time. No one ever challenged his ownership, and he never made the claim that I paid Shimon his proper due. If Shimon were to go ahead and sue Reuven at that point, and Reuven could not legitimately testify that I paid you off, so then we would say to Reuven, it doesn't matter how long you've been living on the property, Shimon has a valid claim, you never paid him, and therefore he's a right to sue you in Bayston and get his property back. And the thing is like this, this is what the Bryce is saying. In a situation where Levi buys the property from Reuven, Levi doesn't know what Reuven did and didn't do. Levi doesn't know whether Reuven paid Shimon the 25% or not. So there's a concept of ta'aninan le, that we make the claim on behalf of someone who, by rights, had no way of knowing one way or the others. We sometimes do this for heirs, and we sometimes do this for buyers if they had no way of knowing. So in this situation, even if Reuven is nowhere to be found, and we have no way of knowing whether Reuven paid Shimon or not, and Shimon is shrine, brings a lawsuit against Levi and Bayston, then we say, listen, Levi has no way of knowing whether Reuven paid you or not. We're going to make the claim on his behalf that Reuven, the guy that he bought it from, actually did pay you off, and therefore you have no claim against Levi. Too much time has passed, and now you've only brought this claim now that Levi has the property. I'm sorry, sir, but that's too late. And that's what it means, Tanina.
Well, we do claim when somebody's trying to buy a property, if there's a lien on the property, we hold the buyer responsible. He should have checked.
So he's got to prove that there's still a lien. He's got to prove that there's a lien on the property.
Couldn't this be the same?
The situation is, we know the history of the property. We know that it was purchased from a Sikri Kon, but the fact is that Reuven was living on it for 3 years or more. And during that entire time, Shimon never made a claim. In that situation, if Shimon now makes a claim against Levi, and Reuven is nowhere to be found, we don't know whether Reuven paid off Shimon or not for his confiscated property, but we make a claim on behalf of Levi. We say that the fact that Shimon never made a claim against Reuven all those years, and we therefore assume that Reuven must have paid him off. We assume that he paid him off, and therefore there's no longer a claim. Tanu Rabbana, next brisa. Haba machmas chov u'machmas an paros ein bo mishum sikri kon. Now the first part of the brisa says that this concept of sikri kon only applies when you have a Gentile oppressor that confiscates property under the threat of death. But let's say you have a Gentile where there's a certain amount of legal standing with the Jewish community. They don't have full rights, they don't have full abilities. Let's say they're dhimmas in a Muslim country, right? So they will get exploited, but they're not going to, as long as they listen to the authorities, they're not going to get killed, right? So that's a situation that we're talking about over here. It's not where there's total lawlessness, and if you don't let them confiscate your property, they're going to kill you. It's that they'll confiscate your property for payment of a debt or just because they want it, right? And you always are holding out hope that you'll be able to get the property back. In that situation, we don't apply the law of Sikri Kon where we say that a Jew is now allowed to buy it from the Gentile confiscator. And the reason is because in our Mishnah, when we talk about a Sikri Kon, we're saying that we assume that the original Jewish owner was Miyash. He gave up all hope of getting it because he's intimidated, he doesn't want to die. So he therefore writes it off completely. But in this situation where the Jew is holding out hope that maybe he'll get the property back, no Jew is allowed to purchase that confiscated property from a Gentile oppressor because the Jew is still holding out hopes that it's his. And therefore, if you try to buy it from a Gentile confiscator, the Jew can sue you completely and try to get his property back. And then it says, and in that situation where you have a non-life-threatening Gentile confiscator, you still have to wait 12 months before you can buy it. So that just contradicted what we just said, because we just said that you're not allowed to buy it from the Gentile confiscator, and now it says you have to wait 12 months. So the Gemara's question is, V'hamart ein ba mishum sikri kon? You just told me that the laws of sikri kon don't apply. So hachi kamar sikri kon atzma tzricha shetisha yud beis chodesh. What we mean is like this. It's like almost like a chisuri mechsura. You have to read it as follows. There's no law of Gentile confiscation when there's no threat of death, and in a case where there is threat of death, you can't buy it from the Gentile confiscator unless you wait 12 months. Okay, that's what we had learned in our Mishnah. Amar Rav Yosef naktinan einan paros bebavel. So Rav Yosef says there's no din of anparos. There's no din of saying that a Gentile confiscated my property, and therefore if a Jew buys it from the confiscator, I can sue him in BAYT. No. If a Jew purchases the property from a Gentile confiscator, the original Jewish owner has no legal recourse to sue that a Jewish buyer in BAYT. Wait a minute. V'haka chazinan di'ika. But there are Gentile confiscators in Bavel. How can you tell me that there are not? So ela ema ein dinan paros bebavel. No, it's true that many times you will have Babylonian Gentiles who will confiscate property just because they want to exploit Jews. But we don't allow BAYT to act upon those cases. My taima keven deika bei davar v'lo azil kabil ema achule achil. The reason is because in Bavel there's a certain amount of lawfulness in the Gentile courts. If a Gentile oppressor confiscates a Jew's property, a Jew does have legal recourse to take him to the secular court system. The fact that he didn't means that for whatever reason he's written off that property, because it all depends on the level of exploitation within the society of the Jewish class. In Bavel, when this Gemara is being written, Jews had certain minimal rights, and therefore even the secular courts would not allow a Jew's property to be willy-nilly confiscated without paying a fair purchase price. And because of that, if another Jew buys that property from a strong-armed guy, the original Jewish owner does not have a right to claim, hey, I didn't want to sell it to him. Well, if you didn't want to sell it to him, you should have taken him to the Goyish courts, and you could have gotten your property back. Anyway, Gidel bar Eloi kabil ara bitaska b'bnei baga. So the way the story seems to go is that there was a Jew whose name was Gidel bar Eloi, and he was a tax collector on behalf of the king. And the way that the tax collection would work is you either pay a cash head tax, or you pay what is it called? I forget what the word is. You pay duty or whatever, or you pay the produce of your property has to be delivered to the king on an annual basis. A certain amount of produce from these landowners. So akdim v'yoiv zuzi titlas shnin. So what he did was, this guy Gidel bar Eloi, is that instead of just collecting the 1-year tax from these landowners, he went ahead and paid in cash for 3 years in advance for their taxes, and then basically said, I've paid for you guys, now I want to consume your payros for the next 3 years. So l'sof asa marvata kamai amrulei shasa kamaisa diyahavis achlas hashta anan yahavinan anan achlinan. So they said, okay, the first year when you paid the tax for us, that was with our consent, and therefore you have by all rights the right to consume the fruit of our property. But now that year is expired, we've decided that we want to pay directly we want to pay duty directly to the king. We're not interested in you paying the tax for us. We're going to pay the cash ourselves, or we'll come up with the produce ourselves to give to the king. So asu, and we want to be in charge of consuming the produce off of our property. So asu lekame de Rav Papa savla michtav le tirfa. So they come to a din Torah. This guy Gidel says, hey, I paid the taxes for them in advance. And they say, no one asked you to do that for us. So Rav Papa was about to award this guy Gidel the rights to eat from their property to get paid back the tax. And Abnei Baga from the landowners. Amalei Ravuna Bered Rav Yeshua Rav Papa in Kena Sisa Sikri Kon. So Rav Huna says to Rav Papa, he says, that's not fair. You're making this guy Gidel like a Sikri Kon, like a forced confiscator. And how can you do that? That's not right. So Ella Amar Rav Huna Bered Rav Yeshua Hiniach Ma'osav Al Keren Tzvi. And therefore Rav Huna says, really the halacha is that this guy's out of luck. he basically placed his money on a deer's antlers, and the deer ran away. And the guy's out of 2 years of tax collection because no one asked him to do that. You can't volunteer in advance to pay the king tax without consulting with the taxpayers. So Zu Mishnah Rishona Basin Shalachrein Amru Halokech Min Asikri Ko Nosein Leba'olam Revia. So the original enactment was that you first have to go to the Jew whose property was confiscated, and then make a deal with him, and then make a deal with the Sikri Kon in order to buy the property. But later the rabbi said, no, you can buy directly from the Sikri Kon as long as you give 25% of the purchase price to the original Jewish owner. So Amar Rav Revia Bekarka O Revia Bimos. There's a whole question of the girsa over here, and we'll just read it the way it appears in front of us. Rav says you can either pay him 1/4 of the real estate, meaning the 1/4 of the value of the real estate, or 1/4 of the purchase price. If you bought it for $100, you can give him $25, or you can give him 1/4 of the field's value. Ushmuel Amar Revia Bekarka Shehin Shlish B'mos. And Shmuel says no. You have to give the guy 1/4 of the property's value, which is actually 1/3 of the purchase price. So basically, according to Shmuel, if you paid $100 for the property, you have to give the original Jew 33 1/3. And that's actually worth 1/4 of the actual value of the property, because the property is actually worth 133 1/3. It's not worth 100 because the Sikri Kon gave you a discount. So if you ended up paying 100 for it, it's really worth 133 1/3. So the Gemara says, "B'mayit kamiflagi." What's the machlokes? Mar savar nechi revia zavin umar savar nechi chumsha zavin. The machlokes is how much of a discount did the Gentile confiscator give to the Jewish buyer? According to Shmuel, it's clear. He gave the Jewish buyer a 25% discount. So if he sold it for 100, the property was worth 133 1/3, and therefore that's the amount. You have to pay 33 1/3 to the original owner. According to Rav, not clear how to be gores, the Rav statement, but really what Rav means to say is that the value of the property, if you paid 100, is really worth 125. And therefore, when he says you pay 1/4 of the purchase price, he means to say that you give the original owner 25, not 33 1/3, because the discount was only 20% and not 25%. So it was originally worth 125. He sold it to you for 100, and therefore you've gotten a discount ultimately of 20%. So take that 20% of the original value of the property, which is now 25, and give it to the original owner. But that's the machlokus between the two, and this is where we stopped in the earlier DAF because we ran out of time because of Rosh Chodesh. We'll continue Mirz Hashem tomorrow.